Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. My name is Hemish and since 2023, I've been interviewing some of the most talented and well-respected quality leaders in the pharma and biotech industry to learn how they got to where they are now. This season is all about our guests and their journeys. Why they got into science, how they got into quality, their biggest challenges and greatest learns, and the highs and lows along the way. Every week, I'll be bringing you a new guest with the purpose of inspiring the next generation of quality leaders. Welcome to Season 3. I hope you enjoy the show.
Kyle, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast. Looking forward to recording this. How are things?
Yeah, not bad. Busy, but end of the year is quickly approaching.
Right, absolutely. Well, I've given you a very brief introduction, but could you give the listeners and viewers just a really quick, high-level overview of who you are, what you're doing now?
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Kyle Powell, head of quality for an organization called Ratio Therapeutics. We are just a drug discovery in an early clinical phase radiopharmaceutical company based out of Boston. But we're currently, I think the organization, I joined in June, but about a month prior in May of 2025, they announced that we're pursuing the build out of a Greenfield construction project in Salt Lake City for 65,000 square foot state-of-the-art radiopharmaceutical manufacturing facility to kind of support the vertical integration of our pipeline. So that kind of operational target that we're shooting for is in the second half of 2027. So between kind of the ongoing clinical trial work that we're doing and the manufacturing facility build out has me pretty occupied as the head of quality, the first official kind of quality official in the door at Ratio Therapeutics. So really kind of building the team from the ground up as well.
Amazing. So big role. You've worked in radiopharmaceuticals before and you've built up teams before, but I suppose where would you say your real kind of quality leadership position or career, I suppose, started? How long ago, and what's that journey looked like?
Yeah. So I started off as a regulatory affairs and quality assurance consultant for a small organization at the time called Innovative Science Solutions, based in New Jersey. They're part of a larger group called Lumanity now, but the back when I was working there, we largely focused on, and this is all pre-COVID, we largely focused on strategy development for kind of that last piece in the regulatory approval pathway for a product, and that would be an FDA advisory committee meeting. So if there were any safety issues, if it was a first-in-class product, things like that, that's really kind of where the regulatory teeth had been cut. But kind of day-to-day operations, that was the big bread and butter for that business, but supporting that strategic development. However, through that, I was able to be exposed relatively early on, and probably earlier than I should have been. About 3 days after I joined that organization, the individual who was leading the quality efforts for some of our virtual quality contracts that we held left the organization for another opportunity. So I was kind of thrust into that as a consultant, but also leading kind of the QMS implementation and development for, all sorts of different companies that did dietary supplements, consumer health products, OTCs, RX products. So that's really kind of where that, I guess, tactical and strategic leadership started to develop. And then leading into, after 4.5 years of doing that type of work and really being thrust into that content development piece, kind of got the personnel leadership experience through an opportunity with Evergreen Theragnostics, which was my first radiopharmaceutical organization. Another Greenfield, I think I was employee number 5, another Greenfield construction project out in Springfield, New Jersey. Large pedigree of radiopharmaceutical experience in the personnel that were already there, which I absorbed and was very thankful for because it was totally new to me. But really kind of built the team from the ground up, like I described I was going to do for Ratio here in the next 1 to 2 years.
You mentioned there you were thrust into the role 5-6 years ago now. So yeah, a lot of the people that I speak to at sort of director level are going through that shift in their career where they're growing up into a bigger leadership role, aspiring to get into a head of quality position. One of the biggest challenges is that tactical shift, tactical to strategic. In a startup, you're still wearing many hats and you still have to be tactical, but you also have to think kind of bigger picture and be doing the stuff that the head of quality needs to be doing.
Yeah.
What's talk me through, I guess, that journey for you, and like what have been the hardest things about getting bigger roles over the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah. So I think I pride myself on being pretty good at the tactical piece because that's where I started and that's, logically where everybody starts. Nobody should ever be thrust into the strategic quality thinking without the tactical experience. But I think the hardest or the biggest challenge for me is kind of pulling yourself out of that tactical mindset where you don't need to be the one writing deviations or implementing kappas or everything like that. You just need to be tracking that to completion with the team that you're deploying in the field and making sure that they're trained appropriately or trained the way you need them to be trained to kind of adopt the culture and the mindset that you want to kind of purvey throughout the organization to be able to make that a reality. And really kind of that getting people to come from different, kind of walks of life when it comes to quality experience, getting them to, whether it be out of the lab or the shop floor or whatever it may be, getting them to adopt, that specific type of cultural mindset that you want in that specific organization is challenging sometimes.
So what have you had to try and develop? Like if you were to, I guess, look at what you were like as a leader 5 years ago versus now, what are some of the things that you've had to develop and improve on?
Yeah. So I think, from my standpoint, I used to be, I was a big lead by example kind of a guy, but I think that, I want people to emulate how I am leading them. However, to be able to kind of grow themselves as a leader through the organizational chart in whatever organization we're in at the time, but really kind of adopting that leading with a lot of empathy is important to me. And that's something that, out of my personal life, my partner has kind of been able to coach me on a little bit. But having that empathetic mindset really kind of disarms people that are working for you or working with you to be able to say, all right, so this isn't a giant test or anything like that. We're actually working towards developing me as an individual, whether they be a specialist or a shop floor QA or whatever it may be, into that kind of QA manager and things like that. And selfishly, it works for me because, I get leaders that I like and that I like working with and I trust to be able to lead and kind of continue to purvey that culture in the organization.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about this journey over the last few years then from a career perspective, particularly like in the radiopharmaceuticals space. So now this is your second radiopharmaceutical company. You're coming in as a head of quality and it's a complete build out from scratch. Let's take it back a bit. How did you initially get into radiopharmaceuticals? Was it fortuitous that you got that role?
It was nothing romantic. It was just I saw the opportunity for a QA/QC manager role. This was with Evergreen, and decided to apply for it. I was consulting at the time. I actually took the first call while I was on. It was a lunch break during an FDA audit, so I had some time to speak through it. And it sounded like a really, really cool opportunity. Was I ideally looking for a startup? Probably not. I was probably looking to kind of get into like maybe a shop floor QA role or a QA specialist role at a larger pharma. That was the original target when I started saying, okay, kind of starting to see the same thing over and over again at my current organization. So maybe it's time to start looking and growing for that next role. But that's how Evergreen came to be. And it wound up being a great team of people. And we had a lot of success through that.
Yeah. And so now coming in as head of quality then, what does that role look like? What are the challenges ahead of you, from a, still relatively sort of in the midst of your leadership journey, but thrust into a very important role? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think a lot of my day-to-day interactions are interesting because I deal with, we're very much the manufacturing related individuals at Ratio so far. Ratio's existed for, 4 or 5 years at this point, but they're really built on product development and clinical development. So there's a lot of really, really sharp people that are on the clinical development side, the preclinical development side, and the just in general, the product development side. A lot of very, very intelligent people that are real joy to work with. But when it comes to manufacturing drug products and, quality assurance, quality control, things like that, they haven't thought about it at scale at this point. So sometimes conversations are interesting to have at this point, but really, kind of getting them in the mindset of, okay, we're going to have to take this thing that you're doing on the benchtop that's very successful, and we're going to have to make it very successful for, at scale. And really in radiopharma is totally different. Maybe, our colleagues in cell and gene therapy will understand to an extent, but one batch of product can yield one dose that's usable in the clinic or on a commercial setting. So that's not the goal for a commercial product, but that's certainly the reality for a lot of clinical trial products at this point. So it's really important, that scale piece.
What is it you enjoy about working in the radiopharma space?
It has I think radiopharma in general has a long-standing history of, kind of interestingly enough, like not fitting into any one set of regulations. Yes, there are sterile products, but they're also radioactive. It's kind of like the worst of everything you could possibly imagine. It's sterile, it's radioactive, it's short-lived. A lot of these products in early days, radiopharmacies, PET diagnostics, technetium-99 that's used in like cath labs and things like that. That's all being for medical imaging purposes, but also, PET scans and things for oncology purposes. All these products are being made that day and being injected later that day in a lot of cases, or maybe the next day. But, it's very challenging. You're literally, many times at Evergreen, my first taste in radiopharma, we were synthesizing a product, and an hour after it was being dispensed, it was on a chartered plane out to the clinic and being injected a few hours later. I like being that close because it makes you feel very connected to what's happening on the patient side of things, which is great. But it also kind of gives you that buy-in of, we better make sure, how we get there. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time, but that product that leaves the door has to be perfect in the sense that high quality, safe, and efficacious.
Yeah, brilliant. So what did the quality function look like? It's just you at the, when you came in to the role, your head of quality, team of one, team of you, I assume?
Yeah, team of me right now, a handful of contractors that have been great. A lot of, the contracted support that we have is a longstanding history with the guys that started the organization. So that's great to have that relationship with them, but really kind of focusing on building that and starting in 2026, kind of building that quality team. What the team looks like maybe out on the ground in Salt Lake at the manufacturing facility, but also what does that corporate team look like to support kind of the other functions that we have going on, whether it be clinical or preclinical development, whatever it may be.
And from a systems perspective, what does that look like? Are you building that from scratch as well?
Yeah, when I arrived, we were using an electronic quality management system for about a year just to be able to stand up kind of the activities that we're doing on the clinical side of things. I happen to like the system that we're using, so we're going to essentially make an environment for, we're going to have our corporate environment, we're going to have our Boston environment, we're going to have our Salt Lake City environment. So we're really kind of working out spinning off that Salt Lake City environment right now, but the Salt Lake facility will be, the goal is fully electronic and integrated systems, so not a piece of paper in sight, hopefully.
Is there anything unique about this scaling quality systems in the radiopharma space?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the, kind of what that production process looks like. Kind of the two major process themes that you're dealing with is that, a lot of these processes start off as a manual synthesis process, and then they, if they do well enough in the clinic and, the product demands it, they wind up going to an automated or semi-automated type of scale. So you're making, as opposed to 1 to 2 doses per batch, you're starting to make, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 doses per batch.
Yeah.
On an automated synthesizer unit and dispensing unit. But for me, that's the unique part is that the time scale doesn't really change. So whether you're doing manual or automated process, you're essentially manufacturing a melting ice cube. So you need to make sure that that process is efficient, controlled, and can kind of get your product out the door while most of the testing is still ongoing, but having the policies and procedures to support that effort while that product is en route to the patient.
So let's talk a bit about going into the role that you are doing with a team of just yourself and a handful of contractors. Obviously, your stakeholder management around the people around you becomes really important. What have you learned about both collaboration, stakeholder management, and managing upwards in this role as head of quality in a bit of a startup build-out phase?
Yeah.
How have you navigated those sort of challenges? What challenges have they been, and how have you navigated them over the last few years and into the role you're in now?
Yeah. So good question. I think the expectations of, the ratio expectation is that we're hiring this really good, quality individual, whether it be me or somebody else, and they could do this, and this. And yes, I can, but also, it's not feasible for me to do all of it in a compliant way. So we need to make sure that we either contract in that support and get them into our quality management system, or also hire in that support. And really kind of not being, the biggest thing that I've learned, over the past, few organizations and few years has been, let's not be shy about resources that are needed. Yeah, it's fun to say like, yeah, we can take it all on ourselves, but, certain industries demand certain things from resource allocation, and pharma is certainly one of them. So, not being very upfront and transparent with all of your stakeholders is proven to be, really fortuitous for me as a leader, and kind of, that managing upward piece, having those open conversations about, yeah, we can do it, but it's going to look like this if it's just us, but it's going to look like this if it's, a team of 5, and it's going to be 10 times better. And why not save ourselves, the extra work to go back and redo it a year from now, as opposed to just hiring in that talent and taking care of it the right way right now.
How have you gone about improving your communication with people? When you're going in to justify headcount, resources allocation, that's often quite a challenging process, and you have to be able to speak the language of your leadership team in some ways to get them on side and bought into what you're trying to do. So how has that been a challenge? And if so, how have you worked on that communication piece?
Yeah, it was challenging in the beginning for sure. I didn't really know, at that point, joining a startup in Evergreen, I was, didn't really have that skill set. That was one of those soft skills that I was like, all right, I gotta work on this after the first few meetings where everybody was like, yeah, but why do we need it? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Whether it be at Ratio or, Evergreen or Jubilant, I've had the pleasure of working with some really, really good financial and business leaders, and that, have taken the time to coach me on, how do we formulate this conversation to get the resources that you need, or at least a portion of the resources that you need, and, talk about it long-term, how we implement that. So, for me, bringing it back down to the process is important. And how those individuals can support that process, or the capacity of the organization, especially in the manufacturing side of things. We can do this, we could run this many batches simultaneously with 50, but we could double that with another 5 in the right places.
Yeah.
Those kinds of conversations are incredibly important to have, and kind of tying it all back to that bottom line. And, the cost of quality is important in those pieces,
Is there anything you did practically to improve those softer skills?
Yeah. So, I think through I would increase, and it's logical to do this at a startup for sure in the pharma industry, but having those kind of quality management review meetings and being able to, look back and debrief with yourself about, okay, this is what I need to improve here if I want to convince people to be able to make these decisions, and apply that to kind of the next review meeting. So I had those about, I think we were doing a version of those every month, but really kind of the formal quality management reviews were happening every quarter, at least in, as we were busy and scaling at Evergreen, and then, kind of brought that into Jubilant. And now, that's kind of the going rate at Ratio. So being able to kind of constantly have that, it's not just an annual, okay, let me just get apprehensive about having this conversation. It becomes more fluid with the higher level of frequency that you do it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the softer skills development piece is a really important transition for leaders as they grow from, director into heads of VPs type roles.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I see so many people that get stuck because they haven't developed those from an earlier stage in their career.
Yeah, exactly. And then going into a meeting and trying to, going the route of causing panic is not the successful way to do that.
Yeah, that's it. When you're growing in a scale up sort of space, like culture of the business changes. How do you, from a leadership perspective, when there is growth happening and new people coming into the business, both in quality and outside of quality, is there anything that you've learnt to handle cultural change along the business as you grow?
Yeah, good question. I think it's central to kind of developing a good quality strategy is you got to have these, got to find individuals that are willing to kind of adopt whatever type of cultural aspects you want to, deploy within that facility. Mm-hmm. Finding what I found to be most effective was that, you have to find people that doesn't matter, whatever your qualifications are, looking for in the job description, that's fine. But, outside of that, from an attitude standpoint, you got to kind of find the people that are, they don't like losing and they don't like tolerating a lot of losing, but they know how to handle that adversity piece because, this is, if this were easier, everybody would be doing it or more people would be doing it.
Yeah.
Nothing about making, sterile radioactive drugs is easy, especially for the first time in a phase 1 clinical trial or, even at scale and commercial, things happen all the time. So you have to find those individuals that, can take one on the chin and kind of move on from there and kind of realize what happened. And, one of the core pieces to a good quality management system is, kind of have to continuously improve and prevent that recurrence.
Yeah, definitely. What are you, and as you grow, what are you looking for in the people that you're hiring? And obviously, I'm talking more from that softer skills perspective.
Yeah, you have to. I like, now that going back to, kind of the newer leadership style that I adopted through leading through empathy, you have to find individuals, or I like to find individuals that, can empathize with others. I think it's a very effective soft skill to have as an individual. And if you do it well, I think you're kind of on your way to being a good leader in the space. Of course, you have your core competencies. If you have to know your quality events and how to deploy certain things within a regulated environment. But I think those softer skills when it comes to, kind of conflict resolution, empathy are all really important and not, you got to avoid people that, seeming to, point fingers and things like that when things go wrong.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I agree. Looking ahead then, Kyle, when you look at the next sort of, second half or next few years of your career, are there any particular areas that come to mind from a sort of a development standpoint for you that you think you want to try and work on to get bigger roles, later down the line in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, kind of the where I like to end up, I do very much enjoy quality, but also think a lot about, kind of the operational size, but on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Looking at how to, kind of take a snapshot of an organization and say, okay, this is what we have to tweak to be able to improve the operation as a whole, not just from a quality standpoint, working with current leaders and mentors, that are in those higher level operations roles, working with them to say, okay, what are you seeing through your lens when I'm seeing this through a quality lens, and how do I kind of pull that skill set in and develop that for the future? Because, I know you've had a couple episodes on younger quality leaders, and I kind of fit into that mold pretty well, just given the time that I've spent in pharma. So, there's a lot left to learn, but, there's a lot left to do as well. So kind of developing those skills is going to be important for me.
Do you have a mentor outside of your current organization?
Yeah. So the, one of the guys that trained me is when I was a consultant in the early days. He's fantastic. He's a very good guy, and he kind of gets it. He runs his own consulting practice now, but so he gets kind of the other skills outside of quality that you need to develop to become a successful business leader and really kind of be an asset to any organization that you'd be involved in. So it's good having conversations with him about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think it's really impressive, Carl. Like you say, you're a young quality leader. I've interviewed a couple of people and I'm, we're doing this sort of program at the moment around mentorship and development into bigger roles, essentially. And you've thrust yourself into, or you've given yourself the opportunity to be thrust into these positions. So good on you. What do you sort of, if you're looking ahead, like next 12 months, what are you most excited about?
I am very excited because I've always been, I know we've talked about this a few times, but, really getting into that. This will be kind of the first opportunity that I've had to go fully electronic. So I think that's going to be really cool and really kind of lousy for choice when it comes to having good developmental support on the internal side of things, because Ratio does have a fantastic group of individuals on the data team that all have kind of computer science, computer programming experience that really make it easy for me, because kind of talking about a fully integrated system, that is certainly the weak area for me when it comes to the actual integration points. But these guys are, be able to gobble that up in a very short period of time. So that gives me the confidence to say, okay, we're definitely going to go this direction.
Yeah. If we were to have you on in a year's time, what would your team, if all things had gone to plan, what would things look like for you, your career, the team?
Yeah, hopefully I'll come back and say it was all worth it going fully electronic. But and I think the adage of, spending kind of 15 minutes on the front end to save yourself a few hours on the back end at a larger scale, I think is the goal here. Really kind of, developing it doesn't have to be a huge team, but developing individuals that can really kind of take this facility to the next level, taking all on the operational side. Our manufacturing employees that we've hired so far are fantastic. They all have great experience also coming out of Radiopharma in very similar scenarios of, greenfield construction projects or new facility deployments. So really, we should be in a year's time, we'll be in the heart of commissioning and qualification activities. So it'll be a busy time for sure.
Yeah, that's it. Kyle, some really quick fire questions to throw at you.
Yeah.
Who's been the biggest inspiration in your career?
Biggest inspiration, I'd say I have probably a couple that I should include, but definitely my parents. My dad is a longtime engineer by training in medical device, and he's kind of the one who pushed me from a career perspective. Coming out of grad school, he said, why don't you give pharma a try, and not only pharma, but also, the quality and the regulatory space, because I think he saw, the writing on the wall that it was becoming a bigger and bigger field in recent years. And then, my mom has a teaching background, made me realize the importance of effective communication from an early age. Yeah. So that's been a skill that I've honed along the way. But I also try to take, I find, kind of the best qualities of leaders that I've worked with, or take one skill that I've observed that they do very well or have really sharpened over their careers, and kind of take that with me and pop it in my toolbox and see how I can kind of develop that skill as well. So I've been fortunate to work with some really great people over the course of my career so far.
Yeah, amazing. Are there any values, 2 or 3 values that guide how you lead?
Yeah. So, encouraging continuous improvement, realizing that mistakes are always going to be made. It's a pointless endeavor to pursue, absolute perfection, but getting there with minimal mistakes is a reasonable and realistic, expectation. So really, how do we decrease that, that risk of an issue or a mistake happening over the course of time, and through continuous improvement, realizing that, I've worked in places that, an SOP has been effective for the past 15 years. And it's like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So, looking at those types of things and figuring out a better way to do it is really something that I try to encourage at everybody up and down and across the organizational chart.
What's the best piece of advice you've received in your career?
I think being the individual, always trying to move the needle is something that, I've really taken to heart. And I know, being the individual that kind of gets stuff done and being known for that, not only getting stuff done, but getting stuff done the right way is important. I think that gets you some recognition that, otherwise it may not, if you're not, if you're only discussing problems in a meeting as opposed to figuring out how to solving them, and not having meetings and meetings and meetings to discuss the same thing, but actually doing those things that we talk about is really important.
Final question then, for any aspiring quality leaders, people, yourself 10 years ago, let's say, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them in their journey?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to take the next step. I think in those next steps, I think people have a tendency to, it's a big role. People have a tendency to clam up a little bit and be that, that old school quality gatekeeper of, always saying no, and, not encouraging kind of operational units to think things through and think about things in a different way or a more efficient way or whatever it may be. So, we're always here, our number one priority as quality professionals is to encourage a mindset of compliance and build that in from the ground up. So really kind of continuing to find different ways to foster that culture in that environment is critically important to anybody that wants to level up in the quality space.
Kyle, brilliant. And like I said, you're still early on in your leadership journey, but you've achieved a lot of good things, and like really excited for the next 12 months. It would be great to have you on in a year's time if you're not too busy. That is. But good luck with everything, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I hope that you got value from it, whether you're starting your career in quality or if you're at the top of your field. Today's episode was brought to you by RX Group. I'm the founder of RX Group. We are a pharma and biotech recruitment organization focusing purely on quality assurance. We recruit consultants and senior level permanent quality professionals into the pharma and biotech industry. If we can support you, whether that be in a hiring capacity or if you yourself are looking for work, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn, visit our LinkedIn page where you can subscribe to the podcast, and visit our website www.rx-group.io to find out more about us. See you soon.